They say that you should not judge a book by its cover, but my goodness, have you seen the cover of this book? It is gorgeous. Much as I agree with the metaphorical sentiment of that statement, when it comes to the literal application, I do think that good cover design needs to be acknowledged when it is there, and my god is it here. So shout out to Holly McDonald, who did the design, and to Tom Roberts, who did the actual illustration on the cover of this book. Phenomenal work. I won't lie, seeing the cover of this book on a shelf at W.H. Smith's was one of the main things that gravitated me towards it. It is just so visually stunning and compelling, and it made me want to know more. So props to you guys, props to the cover designers for that one. And now onto the actual content of the book itself. In this case, not only is the cover good, but the book is as well. Godkiller is a fantasy book written by Hannah Kaner. It is about Kissin, who is a god killer. In this world, gods are not allowed to be worshipped. It is banned by the king. However, gods do still exist. Belief brings them into existence, and offerings by those who worship them give them more power. This keeps happening, and Kissin's job and the other god killer's job is to go around the world on behalf of the king and put down these gods before they can get too powerful and too threatening. The world that we are presented with here is really cool and compelling. It is a relatively short book for a book of the fantasy genre, but still, even in such a short page count, Hannah Kaner really manages to present such a rich and deep world with interesting world building and lore and history to it. The way the gods work, the way that they have this history, particularly with Kissin, which I'll touch on in a moment, the way it all comes together is incredibly vivid, incredibly well realized. I could almost feel the world jumping off the page as I was reading it. I could very strongly visualize everything that was happening, the characters, the world itself has a very fairy tale-like quality, which I really enjoyed. It is a wonderful world. I do indeed think this is one of the things that Louis Armstrong was seeing, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed reading. Not only that, but the characters we follow through this world are incredibly compelling and well-rounded and well-realized. I was a huge fan of the characters in this book. I really felt for all of their different motivations and situations, and the way that they have these different dynamics with each other based on their own experiences. Kissin in particular is our main character of the book. I really loved her. She was my favorite character to read. She has this very cool sort of wry humor which is very endearing, and this deep-seated anger that comes from her backstory. Her backstory being the thing that the book opens with. So back when she was a child, god worship was still very much the norm. It was not banned yet, none of that had happened. Kissin and her family were worshippers of a sea god living on a coastal town. However, at some point, seemingly the entire rest of her town started to worship this new fire god that had sprung up, and they band together to try and sacrifice Kissin and her family by trapping them, containing them in their home, and burning it down as an offering to this new fire god. Kissin desperately tries to save herself and her family, but in the end, her father ends up sacrificing himself so that Kissin is the only survivor of this incident. So from page one, I was gripped. There's a lot going on. It's a very intense situation that we are thrown into, and I really like how much you can tell that this incident has buried deep into Kissin's psyche as a character as we go into the main focus of the book, where Kissin is a fair bit older. So many of her actions, her thoughts, her motivations, her way of thinking are derived from this one singular traumatic incident, and it's very cool to see her progress through the story. When we first meet her as a grown-up, she is so closely guarded, so untrusting, and you can't really blame her for it. She was betrayed by her closest neighbors, people she considered not only neighbors but friends, and yet they tried to sacrifice her and her family to this new god that had sprung up. So again, it is no wonder that she has an immense disdain for the gods of this world and has taken up a career in killing them. However, as we follow her through the book, we do see that there is still a softer side to Kissin that does shine through. The story really kicks into gear when she stumbles upon a little girl who is bound to a god by some unknowable magical means. This god in particular being a god of white lies named Skediketh, and the little girl being Inara. Inara and Skediketh work together to seek Kissin's help to try and figure out a way to separate them, which throws Kissin Kissin into a conflicting situation. She hates gods and wishes them dead, but there is no way to kill or even harm Skediketh without also harming Inara. And we see that Kissin has a soft spot for little girls who are in trouble, given that she was once one herself. As well as Kissin, Inara, and Skediketh, we also have Elagast, who is along for the ride. He is a former knight, used to be very close buddy-buddy with the king, but when we meet him at the start of the book, he has traded in that life for the humble life of a baker, without revealing his true identity. However, it is very clear that he is still bound by immense loyalty and a sense of duty to the king, who he sees as a brother and a friend, and these characters all find themselves walking down a dangerous road towards a city of fallen gods. In this little group, I really love the dynamic that emerges, how they all sort of play off each other. Kissin and Elagast often having very different ideas of how to handle the situation, Skediketh being something of a wild card in the mix. We get POV chapters from all four of these characters, Skediketh included, which is very interesting to see his perspective on the whole thing, and they are all super compelling. I was fully invested across the board in their personal journeys as well as the overall physical journey that they found themselves on. The pacing of this book moves at a very tight clip. We are very much go, 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 which I do appreciate. Not that there's anything wrong with a slower paced story, but I do find for my own personal tastes, I like it to get going a bit faster. Maybe that's just a remnant from the burnout I faced with Wheel of Time, but I did appreciate that in this book the ball sort of just kept on rolling. I never really felt there was any time where it was dragging or getting slowed down, or we were doing something that didn't quite feel like it was meshing well with everything else, so big props to the pacing of this book, moving fast enough to keep me as a reader engaged while also leaving enough room for the characters to breathe and expand and grow with each other. One particular moment that is a real standout from this book for me, and this is a very slight spoiler, so if you really don't want to know anything and you're thinking about reading this one, maybe skip over this next section. I will put a little time code in this video so that you can do so. But I really like the way we are shown the threats that the gods represent, why Kissin is so afraid of them and angry at them and adamant that they must be put down. There is a moment where Skediketh is inadvertently given an offering by someone who is unaware of the situation. As soon as this happens, he feels his power begin to grow and he becomes incredibly arrogant, so much so that although up until now, Skediketh and Inara have been pretty symbiotic and have presented themselves as two friends with the same goals who trust each other, we're even told that Skediketh has promised to Inara that he, despite being a god of white lies, would never lie to her. However, as soon as this happens, he is given an offering, his power swells, he starts to disagree with Inara, and then he takes it upon himself to take over her body entirely. The escalation of the power of the gods, the way that one offering makes them wish for another greater offering, and how it always leads inevitably to blood sacrifice, to the offer of another human being's life for power. We are shown firsthand the first pebble in the avalanche. Skediketh immediately going back on his promise to never lie to Inara or use his power on her. Instead, in quite a horrific way, puppeteering her body, speaking through her mouth, making her choices and decisions and actions for her. It is genuinely unsettling to read, and I really love this scene because it gives us a first-hand view at the kind of thing that Kissin is fighting against. With just a simple, tiny offering, Skediketh has gone from a pretty powerless god, all things considered, to someone who can entirely control and manipulate another person, as well as manipulate psychologically those around him. The horror of Inara's bodily autonomy being ripped away from her by someone she thought she could trust, and that turns out is a big theme in this book, trust and betrayal. None of these characters who are traveling together in particular trust each other. They are kind of ready to give up on a moment's notice and go their own way, but they are united in a common goal. Yet the fear of trusting and letting someone in weighs heavily on this group. And that whole sequence pretty much encapsulates the worst case scenario, where someone you trust breaks that trust, breaks promises they have made to you, and reneges on what was considered a friendship. It's a very heavy and tense scene. It does eventually get resolved, but still, I really loved the way it depicted all of that, showing this is what Kissin is fighting against. Another dynamic between the characters is a little bit of a romance between Kissin and Elagast, the Godkiller and the Knight. While I will say I did not find this aspect of of their dynamic as compelling as others, such as their different views of the world, it was still fun to read, despite being a very boilerplate kind of romance. Very much at the start they don't like each other, then as they travel together they start to, oh, maybe they like each other. It is entertaining to see them both sort of acknowledge and deny their feelings for each other to themselves, and most importantly, try not to let the other know that they are starting to have feelings. Especially when we get chapters from Inara's POV, and she can pretty clearly see there is chemistry between the two. That was very fun. There is a lot of mystery and intrigue set up in this book. There's a few little seeds of things and tension that builds, some of which does get answered in this book, some of which is still to be answered in follow-up books in this series. But for every seed that was planted, I found myself fully invested in wanting to know why that had happened in such a way, and I am still invested in the things that we have not got a resolution on yet. But as I said, this is the first book in a series. This is book 1 of the Fallen Gods trilogy. It's a very strong parallel between this book and the last one I read. I guess I'm just on a Fallen God streak at the minute. But given how much I enjoyed this book, I will certainly be continuing the series. I'm sure that the second book will be finding its way into my hands before too long. So all in all, Godkiller by Hannah Kaner, just really fun fantasy adventure, really cool world, great gripping characters who have good solid character arcs throughout the book, and to top it all off, a cover illustration that is just beautiful. What more can you ask for than that? Godkiller by Hannah Kaner gets a big thumbs up from me. So those are my thoughts on Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. Please let me know if you have read this book, what you thought about it in the comments below. If you like this video, then like it. If you want to see more from me, then subscribe, or possibly check out another video that I have made, perhaps another book review. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and as always, I will see you in my next one.